Veritas Aquitus by Bones Boy 15, Chapter 18, Rivals. So, who would like to explain this to me? Asuma's dark eyes roamed over the four boys with an intimidating look that told them he was not in the mood for any games. To be quite frank, he really wasn't. He and Kurna had been enjoying a lovely lunch outing when his scroll had rung, and Osman requested he find the team he was charged with overseeing. Asma was already annoyed with being interrupted, and learning that the interruption was due to his charge's rowdy behaviors did little to help his rising temper. He walked into the sound room that Team Knox had claimed for the morning and found what could only be described as a catastrophe that could cost at least 50,000 lien to fix the room alone, not counting the instruments or hardware, which had been put to additional creative use by the four boys. Haku's head and upper torso had ripped through the drumhead of a snare, his arms bound to his body by the instrument's material. A guitar of some sort had been embedded into the wall neck first, beside a certain ginger's head, and the keyboard in the room was shoved against the soul faunus' stomach so as to keep Kurama pinned to the wall. Naruto had another guitar smashed over his head and dangled from his neck while his hands had wrapped around Sasuke's neck. Sasuke likewise had his hands on the guitar around Naruto's neck, with black arcs of aura running up the steerings. The two had stopped once Asuma had opened the door and shot to their feet, accusing one another with fingers aimed at their respective opponents. "The duck-haired bastard! That whiskered dumbass!" Asuma's hand shot out and clamped over Naruto's and Sasuke's mouth. The two teens grabbed at the hands over their faces, struggled, and muffled grunts escaped the small cracks between Asuma's palms in their skin. The experienced huntsman turned his gaze to the two other boys under his watch. "Let's try one more time, without yelling or insults." Asuma looked pointedly at Haku. "We'd managed to practice for 3 hours before it all happened," Haku said. He sat down on one of the knocked over speakers, seemingly resigned to his fate of being trapped by the snare drum, and hung his head. "Then during the 5 minute break, Kurama, I didn't start this. Don't you dare blame this on me, Yuki." The air around Kurama's head became thin, and the faunus found it slightly difficult to breathe. He looked over at Asuma, who had narrow eyes locked on the fox-like teen's form. "Do not interrupt," Asuma growled, and Kurama nodded frantically. He released the invisible bubble he had formed around Kurama's head, and the faunus gasped as he swallowed the air that was slightly deprived of him. Dark eyes turned back to Haku, especially, and the boy gulped. Asuma fought back the smirk that threatened to form on his face when he heard the audible admission of fear, and it wasn't without good reason. No one wanted to suffocate or drown. Aside from disease, blood loss, or poison, those were the most slowest deaths possible. But well, like I was saying, Kurama mentioned his date to the dance, Haku said. The light stutter at the beginning nearly broke Asuma's composure again, but the experienced hunter held strong. "Sasuke and Naruto and I teased him a little about getting a date, and eventually the teasing shifted to Sasuke, who hadn't yet found who, despite his sudden rise in popularity since Kurama released a certain photograph to the other students. Again, you're welcome," Kurama said with a smirk aimed at the black-haired boy. Sasuke glared daggers at Kurama, and black sparks danced across his hands. "However," Haku said after he gave Kurama a pointed look, "Sasuke then turned the tables and made a jab at Naruto and Yang's late return the other night. Naruto responded accordingly with a retort concerning Sasuke's ex-girlfriend, and this is the part where you came in." Sasuke nodded and looked back at Asuma nodded and looked back at the two in his group. Naruto and Sasuke had once more started to glare at one another. Naruto's eyes flashed gold while his skin began to heat up, and Sasuke's hands began to spark once more. The older huntsman sighed and recalled a few similar, if not milder, instances that occurred between the two boys when they were enrolled in Khan Academy. They were like the sun and the moon, both worked together well, but there were times that they clashed. It seemed with all the stress of their current duties, along with a smidge of teenage hormones, the two began to fall into old and familiar habits. "I suppose there's only one solution for this," Asuma sighed. Thankfully, Beacon had tons of funding that could easily fix and replace the damage itself within the room. Pricey it would be, but in the long run, it wasn't as damaging as, say, the incident that Cage, that gave Team Cage a good cover for watching over a few of Beacon's most promising. Assuming Asuma forced Naruto and Sasuke to headbutt one another in order to break off their staring contest. He looked at the two in his grasp sternly once. Sasuke shook off the daze that came from the blow, and Naruto got over the mild irritation that came from the small pain he received. Asuma tightened his grip. "I'm going to let you go, and you're going to go free Kurama and Haku from their predicaments. The four of you are going to quietly follow me until I say otherwise. Am I understood? Naruto and Sasuke sent another quick glare at one another before they looked back at him and nodded. Good! Asuma released their mouths and put his hands on his hips. Get to it. So that's what happened, huh? Kurenai said thoughtfully. She sent a reply to the message Asuma had sent her via scroll before she sent two more messages to Eo and Guy. With her teammates informed of the situation, Kurenai decided to round her team up and join Asuma's group near Emerald Forest. It had been a while since she'd seen the two boys spar. A small smile spread across her lips as she thought back to when the boys were young. Sasuke was the pretty little boy that all the girls had crushes on, and Naruto was the orange-clad troublemaker filled with what seemed like endless energy, especially when Kurama assisted him. The two boys were alone at the time. Sasuke's parents were recently dead at his brother's hands, and Naruto without his. Which one would think who would bring the two together? But no, they absolutely hated each other. She was an assistant teacher then, something that helped her cement her dreams to be a teacher later in life, and managed to help stop their fights before they fell out of hand. Thankfully, the worst their childhood squabbles had ended with bruises or cut lips. That is, until Sasuke was poisoned by one of Kon's former elites. Kurt and I remember that day clearly. Not even 3 weeks after the vacuum intermediate tournament, the day Asuma lost his father and the village lost their beloved elder, Sasuke ran from Kon. Naruto pursued him, and upon catching up with the boy he called his rival, fell into another fight. This time, however, they had their aura accessible to them, and their siblings had been somewhat trained. Kurenai didn't know how the fight went, but she knew that Naruto had come out the victor, and the then 12-year-old managed to drag the battered and bruised Sasuke back through the village gates with a dried blood, infected cuts, and what looked like a bad burn on the left side of his skin. Oba was stationed at the gate that day, and his words still chilled Kurenai to the bone. Those two boys are either going to be the best heroes this world has ever seen, or the worst villains to walk this planet. Granted, Oba was a bit over-imaginative sometimes, but still, Kurenai and still had not been made privy as to what caused the damage. Oh, the official statement was that they were attacked on the way back by a pack of beowulfs, but Kurenai knew the village leader was using that as a way to conceal something. Frankly, Kurenai wanted to know what it was so bad so she could help access the boys' mental states, which had always been in question prior to their acceptance to begin. For God's sakes, Naruto had accidentally killed someone, and Sasuke, until after he and Naruto fought, had been swearing to his grave he'd find his older brother and killed him. Neither saw the village psychiatrist, and Kakashi, their original teacher, kept his mouth shut firmly over what he considered to be his team's business. It was the one time Kurenai truly wished to punch the smug-reading bastard right in his face. Honestly, all that man did in his free time was walk around the village with his nose buried in his orange edition of Ninjas in Love. Kurenai will never know how he became the Kurenai. The red-eyed woman was torn from her thoughts when the girl she was on the way to pick up ran across the corner and slid to a stop in front of her. All dressed in their casual gear due to it being the weekend. Yang and Ruby had wide eyes and had bright smiles on their faces, while Weiss seemed a bit upset and Blake looked indifferent, but had a small gleam of intrigue in her amber eyes. Kurenai supposed that the indifference and intrigue was better than the obsessed exhaustion yet the funniest used to have about her. Yang talked, and Naruto's ridiculous idea did some good, it seemed. Hello, girls. I was just on my way to pick you up. Kurenai said with a small smile. Best not to trouble them with her thoughts after all. Asuma has something. Uchiha and Uzumaki are going to fight. There, we told her. Can we go back to the ballroom now, please? Weiss asked with a huff as she crossed her arms over her chest. Ruby sent her partner a small pout. We've been in the ballroom since breakfast, the red-hooded girl whined. Besides, think of it as getting ready for the tournament. Team Nox is going to be one of the hardest competitors, and we know what they can do. Please, any strategy you can come up with will be akin to a general's compared to Uzumaki's strategies, Weiss said, her arms still crossed over her chest while she sent her team leader a small frown. Yang gained a small, secretive smirk at Weiss's words, but kept her thoughts to herself. Kurenai furrowed her brows. Wait a minute, how did you find out about the spar? She asked the four. Ruby nudged her sister, who pulled her scroll out from her jacket pocket. We got this mass message from Coco a few minutes ago, Yang said, as she offered the technical device to the older girl woman. Amused, like eyes turned to Ruby, and a smile grew on Yang's face. Well, why Blake and I did. Rubes here forgot her scroll in her room. It was breakfast time. I was more concerned about food than what I had with me. Ruby said sheepishly. She sent another pout at her white-haired partner. Plus, Weiss kept us in the dumb ballroom after we ate, so I couldn't go get it. I need your help with the decorating, Ruby, Weiss said pointedly before she looked back at the huntress assigned to be their mother hen. When she finished reading the message, Kerr and I pinched the bridge of her nose and gave Yang her scroll back. I'm going to kill Oba, she mumbled. With a heavy sigh, Kerr and I lowered her hand and made an about turn. Come on, let's go before the whole area gets crowded. Asma glared at Oba. He had only wanted his team and their respective chargers to witness the two teammates spar, hopefully to knock down the boys' egos, as well as to let them vent without having to be worried about holding back too much. Exertion was a great stress reliever after all. Now, though, there was a massive assembly of teens from the visiting schools. Asma definitely had the Ospin and the hard ass that was General Einwood about them by Vale's legal terms anyway, sanctioned underground fight he was going to have the boys do. Both men initially objected to the fight, but Asuma convinced them after 10 minutes of heated argument. However, he had to allow them to set the perimeter, not let it rain throughout the whole forest like Asuma wished. Let it be known that while Asuma does enforce the law of the kingdoms he is in, he usually finds more outrageous, stupid, or overly complicated to the point of uselessness. He was from Vacuo, and that was what most thought of the other kingdoms' ridiculous regulations. This is all on your head. Asuma informed the sunglasses wearing man. He pointed a finger at Oba and his eyes narrowed. If any of those kids tries to interfere and gets hurt, I'm blaming you. I understand. I will protest though, giving them those rules to abide by. I know what I'm doing, Oba. You watch your kids, don't let them watch you. Asuma said firmly as he turned back to the large 110-foot wide circle that the crowd had formed. He walked over to one side, standing to Kurnai's right near her team, and opposite the scarcely serious guy and Oba, who had teams Juniper and Coffee close to them. Osmo looked at his left, where who had team where Kurma stood, with his arms crossed and his gaze focused on the two teens that stood 20 feet from each other. Haku was on Kurma's left, his gaze just as serious as Guy's and Oba's. In Haku's hands were Naruto's gauntlets, the Stormbreakers, and at his hip was Sasuke's sword Amaterasu. Asuma looked back at the two fighters and lifted a hand, calling for silence. It came quickly for a large group of teens, but once it had, the experienced huntsman stepped forward, his hand still raised. The rules for this part are simple. No excessive use of aura and no weapons allowed. The fight will end when either one can no longer stand, surrenders, or when I say so. Do you understand? Yes. Give us the go-ahead already. I need to rip this smug bastard a new asshole, Naruto stated with a scowl. You won't even be able to leave a scratch on my face, dumbass, Sasuke said with a small sneer as he tapped his thumb against his forehead. First make the Taritsu no In seal of confrontation. Asuma's orders was met with confused whispers from the crowd, save for his team as well as Haku and Kurama. Naruto and Sasuke kept their heated glares locked as they lifted opposite hands. Naruto's right and Sasuke's left. Their index and middle fingers remained raised while the ring and pinky curled inward. The thumb followed over them. The sight brought a small smile to Asuma's face before he hardened his gaze and brought his hand down. Begin! Sasuke moved first, being the fastest of the two. An underhanded punch came from the left, striking Naruto in the stomach. His eyes narrowed. Sasuke followed with another blow. His hand balled tightly and became a solid fist, a haymaker that hit its mark in Naruto's right side. Naruto stumbled back with a cringe on his face as his arm instinctively went to cover his side. No excessive aura meant he was not allowed to enhance his already impressive durability, but Sasuke could and had. That blow fractured a rib. Naruto was sure of it. Well, retaliation was needed. From his coiled position, initially meant to defend his side, Naruto launched himself at Sasuke. His initial punch flew over Sasuke's head when the Riveter team ducked to the side, but the follow-through elbow and improvisation nailed the smug prick right in the jaw. Sasuke was knocked to the ground from the blow, but quickly got back to his feet. Not bad. Sasuke's compliment was soft, and he rubbed his bruising skin with his hand. His onyx eyes didn't leave the cerulean blues that glared back at him. A smirk spread across Sasuke's face. Felt worse though. Naruto grit his teeth, but kept from lashing out. Like many with semblances that it created, embodied, resembled, or used fire, Naruto's greatest weakness is his temper. As a boy with no parents and really no authority figure to keep him in check, Naruto succumbed to his anger a lot more often than he'd like to admit. Sasuke knew this. They had been rivals since childhood after all, and exploded it constantly. That knowledge alone was enough to make Naruto's blood boil. Oh, going with the silent treatment again? You haven't done this for me in years. Sasuke said thoughtfully. He let his left foot slide behind his right, his left arm fall behind his back, and turned to the side. Sasuke held his right hand out and beckoned Naruto. I will admit, this is probably even more annoying than your constant chatter. That I can tune out, but this, I have to wonder, what exactly are you thinking about right now? Your mother. Sasuke's amusement fell and his eyes narrowed. The crowd let out a loud, coarse gasp, and someone in the back yelled, "Oh, snap! It's on now!" Naruto smirked. Like he said, he and Sasuke had been rivals since childhood. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses far better than anyone else could ever hope to. Granted, back then Naruto would be the first to succumb to his emotions before Sasuke. However, now that he's matured slightly and learned from possibly the man who was the master of antagonizing his enemies, Naruto knew when to react and when to think. You're dead, dead last. Bring it, duck butt. The two charged at each other and fists flew. Some blows struck, some others blocked, and others were countered. Sasuke's strikes were fast and effective, calculated and powered by his fury, perhaps also a tiny bit of aura, mostly fury though, mostly. Naruto's blows were heavy and wild, aimed to hit once and cripple a joint or muscle. Mild anger swelled through his blood. The anger at Sasuke's attitude, his comments made earlier in the day, that had dwindled slightly. It was still there, but it didn't control him much. Naruto missed the wide swing aimed at least give Sasuke a black eye or broken nose, or at least give him a concussion. Sasuke used the miss to his advantage. He dropped low and swept his leg across the ground. Naruto instinctively jumped to avoid it, and then cursed once he realized what had happened. The initial launch that he had used against the White Fang Lieutenant on the docks was not an Uzumaki original, but a modified variant of a kick used by Uchiha Sasuke. Naruto just fell into the same trap he managed to avoid time and time again, and even duplicate at some point. Realizing his blunder, Naruto's arm shot up to cross over his face. Just as Sasuke's foot shot up, the sandal smacked into Naruto's arms, and the whiskered blonde flew up. Wow, look at him go! Mercury had a mildly impressed smirk on his face as the whiskered blonde rocketed into the clouds. He whistled lightly when the stoic raven-haired teen launched up after him from the ground. Don't see that every day. No, you most certainly do not, Cinder said with a pensive frown on her face. Her arms crossed over her chest and her eyes narrowed. The clouds began to darken overhead, and thunder could be heard rumbling in the distance. Cinder turned her gaze to the mint-haired girl. Her red eyes locked on the spot the two boys had disappeared into. Emerald, why did you not tell me of their semblances? She asked slowly. Emerald didn't tear her eyes away from the dark sky, her frown prominent. How can I tell you what I don't know? We used to date, not spar. Cinder clicked her tongue in annoyance with a useless retort. She knew of the blonde semblance from Roman's report on the failed shipyard heist, a strength boost unlike which has never been seen before, but the teammates were unknown. Now Cinder had figured it to be speed, based on his movements, but then there was a flash of light and a crack of lightning. She saw the silhouettes of the boys in the clouds. The blonde was still covering his face, and the raven-haired had a leg extended. It would seem that lightning was his semblance. Where did they go? Weiss asked quietly, her eyes glued to the dark sky. Up. Yang Su frowned and cupped her hands around her mouth. Come on, Naruto! Kick his ass! Is now really the time for that? Blake asked. She could see where Yang would want to cheer for her boyfriend on, but it seemed obvious to her that Sasuke had a larger advantage. Naruto was a tank, sure, but he was limited here. Sasuke's semblance was much more versatile under these rules, and he needed only a slight bit of aura. You wouldn't cheer Sun on if he was fighting Neptune? Yang asked. Sun and Neptune don't seem like the type of friends who make death threats with one another, Blake said dryly. Says you? You and Sun haven't been on a date yet, so what do you really know about him? Shut up, Yang. Blake decided to return her attention to the fight, lest she incriminate herself. If Yang found out about the tea Blake and Sun shared, the teasing would be merciless. Blake would die long before Yang learned of it through her. Take a hint from the best. Dead last, Sasuke snarled as his right leg rose up. When you fall down, the axe kick made its mark on Naruto's crossed arms, and the blond teen broke through the darkened clouds in a rapid descent. He hit the dirt with a loud bang and made a small crater even by his normal standards. A cloud of dust covered the area after Naruto's impact, and Sasuke leaned with a grunt on the edge. The black-haired teen peered down at Naruto with a small sneer. Stay down. Can't tell me what to do, Naruto mumbled into the dirt. He planted his hands on either side of his body and began to push himself up. Freaking smartass. I'd rather be a smartass than a dumbass, Naruto said groggily. He turned to face Sasuke and was met by a sandaled boot to the head. Naruto fell once more to his hands and knees. Immense pain filled his mouth along with a familiar metallic taste. Naruto's eyes flashed, and he looked over his shoulder at Sasuke. The raven-haired teen's smug grin fell when Naruto spat out a reddened tooth. Oh, crap! Asuma grimaced. The beacon students near him, save for an equally grimacing Kurama, gave him quizzical looks. Feeling the many eyes fall on the older off man, Asuma sighed. Naruto takes pride in four things: his skin as a huntsman, his noodles, his ability to pull off four in the color orange, and his smile. Apparently his grin was the only thing he inherited from both of his parents, the smoker said as he pulled out a cigarette and lit it. He took a long drag and exhaled while the whiskered blonde got to his feet. I doubt that I need to tell you how important that is to him. They're going to break the limit or a rule, Kurama said knowingly. Asuma nodded in agreement. Yes, they are. Are you going to intervene? Kurama asked. Asuma shook his head in the negative. Not unless I absolutely have to. Smart call, Kurama nodded. Asuma grinned lightly and crossed his arms over his chest. The old man didn't raise a fool, just a rebel. Naruto said nothing as he got to his feet and wiped the blood away from the corner of his mouth. He calmly climbed out of the crater that he created and stood to Sasuke's immediate left. Would it help if I said I was sorry? Naruto shook his head. Fair enough. Sasuke brought his arm over his shoulder and moved to deliver a fast chop to the back of Naruto's neck. Naruto tilted out of the way so that the edge of Sasuke's fingernails barely scraped his skin. The blonde dropped to his hands and thrust his feet into Sasuke's stomach. Sasuke was launched a good distance away, where he landed tumbling backwards head over heels. Sasuke groaned as he started to rise. One of his onyx eyes cracked open, locked with Naruto's cerulean blue. Their gaze held for another minute before Sasuke reached into his pocket and pulled out a small red crystal that he popped into his mouth. Did he just eat a fire dust crystal? Neptune asked with narrowed eyes. What's his name again, son? A red-headed teenage boy asked with a glance aimed at the fondest member of the Mistral team. Uchiha Sasuke, Sun said. His grin was small, but his gaze was focused on the fight, particularly focused on his friend, who had tensed immediately once he recognized what Sasuke had done. The sage-haired teen to Sun's right lost some color to his darker skin. Uchiha, like as in the Grim Master Uchiha? He asked. Yep, Sun nodded. The same guy that turned a pack of Urusai loose on his team before he drove his father insane? Neptune asked, his eyes widened. The very one. Oh, wonderful. Neptune leaned over to the redhead beside him. Scarlet, remind me to stay away from Team Nox during the tournament. Only if you do the same for me, Scarlet said with a small grimace. His eyes bulged out of their sockets when Sasuke's chest expanded and his head reared back. What the heck? Wise's light blue eyes were just as wide as the eyes of all those around her when Sasuke's chest expanded in an absurd manner. Is that supposed to happen when you use dust? Ruby asked. Nope, Kurama's answered in Wise's stead. You're about to see one of two people who have nearly mastered the use of edible fire dust crystals in battle. Watch carefully. Sasuke flung his head forward and held his right hand up to his mouth, the index and thumb a centimeter apart. A massive ball of fire expelled out of Sasuke's mouth as his chest deflated. The fireball, easily the size of Jetsuhashi, flew at Naruto rapidly and burnt the grass beneath it without making contact. Its target did nothing to move out of the way, but he did bring his arms back and extended his hands. Kurenai's eyes went wide, and she turned to her fiancé warningly. Asuma, I know, he's going to use the Toad's thunderclap, Asuma said firmly. He cupped his hands over his mouth. Guy, Oba, thunderclap! The two men seemed to pale at his announcement. Kurama and the four adults covered their ears with their hands and dropped to the ground like they were preparing for a tornado. The sight of the four experienced huntsmen and huntresses crouching down and clapping their hands over their ears was enough to make the large audience of teenage students do the same. Eyes stayed locked on the fight even if they couldn't hear anything. This is going to suck so bad, Haku overheard Kurama mumble. And Naruto's arms, shoulders, and chest tightened for a brief moment before, like a coiled spring being released. He relaxed the tension and brought his hands together. Instead of the usual clap of skin coiling with skin, there was a massive boom, and the force of Naruto's amply named thunderclap released a huge gust of wind that expelled from his hands outwards. The gust washed over the crowd and knocked over a few who were unprepared for the worst of the winds. Sasuke's fireball was extinguished almost a half second before it could reach Naruto, but that didn't deter the Raven Hair teen in the slightest. While their audience recuperated from the thunderclap, Sasuke charged at Naruto despite the ringing in his ears. Onyx's eyes narrowed as another red crystal was pulled from his pocket and popped into his mouth. Didn't think he'd have learned that from his godfather. Sasuke thought bitterly as he chewed the crystal and mixed his aura with it. Well, if quality won't stop him, maybe quantity will. Sasuke inhaled through his nose and exhaled small fireballs from his mouth. The projectiles were evaded by his opponent, who began to back away from Sasuke despite the obvious advantage he had in close quarters combat. What is he doing now? Sasuke narrowed his eyes slightly and stopped his pursuit, but continued his rapid-fire assault. His rival was stupidly smart when in battle, and the last thing Sasuke could afford would be one of Naruto's infamous on-the-fly strategies. Sasuke fired his last fireball and took in his surroundings with his peripheral vision. No traps, no reason for me to be lured. I haven't had my eye off him at all, except for when I tried to crush him a second. Oh hell, he did. Sasuke looked up at the clear, cloudless sky, wincing when his eyes made contact with the bright sun. He looked back at the last place he saw Naruto and scowled when he noted that there was no whiskered blonde to be seen. Shit! Sasuke cursed under his breath. He made me paranoid. God damn it! Where is he? Where is he? He's not below, in front, on either side, or behind me. So that leaves above. Sasuke looked up again and narrowly jumped away for the two descending feet belonging to his opponent. Glowing Naruto had a mad grin on his face as he landed in the ground. The force of his landing made the ground crack and cave in for a good 30 feet in diameter. Damn! And I was sure that the food car destroyer would have done the job. Naruto said. Maybe if we were still young, but he used that one on me the last time we fought. Sasuke said. He smirked and landed outside of the impact zone Naruto had made. Sasuke held his left hand around his right wrist, as black lightning began to crackle at the tips of his fingers. I think we're almost recovered from your attempt to cheat and win that last, he informed his rival. Naruto's grin widened, and he held his right hand out in front of him with the right over it. A golden sphere began to form in Naruto's palm, and his left hand began to move erratically to keep the shape. Then let's end this like we usually do, bastard. Naruto's skin lost its golden glow while the sphere remained over his palm. Let's end it with a bang. Is he shaping his aura? Pyrrha asked with a blink of her eyes. I believe so. Ren nodded. What? John exclaimed while he wiggled his fingers around in his ear. He still couldn't hear a damn thing since Naruto clasped his hands. Such passion. It is the embodiment of the flames of youth, Guy declared boisterously as tears poured down from his eyes, and he held his fist in front of him. They too are eternal rivals, to always match in battle when the feeling arises, to assist one another with foes they cannot alone defeat. Oh, now I feel a great need to challenge my hip and cool rival. What? John asked, while his teammates gave the man confused looks, save for Nora, whose attention was fixed on the fight. Guy, Kakashi doesn't have time to do any of your challenges, not to mention that he's a whole kingdom away. Oba said dryly. He adjusted his glasses and crossed his arms over his chest while his teammates slumped to the ground in despair. Drat! Guy exclaimed. What's Naruto doing? Koko asked with a small frown. In an advanced form of aura manipulation, Oba said. He held a finger up. In fact, a specific form that was developed by Naruto's father. Only 3 people to this day can manipulate their aura in such a manner, and Naruto is one of them. It just looks like he's making a sphere around his fist, Velvet said. Fox shook his head. It's not just that. The normally quiet team member spoke softly, his voice suave and rough, all at once from not being used. Fox's wide eyes were focused on the fight. The type of manipulation, making a shape out of aura alone, requires focus and balance, things that novices in aura manipulation can't easily do. Well said, Fox, Oba nodded. Even for those with semblances that involve unique aura manipulation, forming a simple sphere out of pure aura is difficult. And this is why most semblances exert control over something or physical condition the body for a short period of time. I bet I could do it, Coco said thoughtfully. She nodded. She nudged the auburn-haired boy beside her. And if not me, then our Fox boy could. Fox gave his team leader a bland look, and this was why he usually kept quiet. Coco got lively whenever she spoke. With the final sigh, Fox returned his gaze to Coco's self-proclaimed little brother, a newfound form of intrigue in his eye. Fascinating, Cinder said under her breath. She heard of aura shaping being discovered and taught in Bakugo's hidden schools, but that sort of expertise and skill was something she expected of the Toad Sage or the Snail Princess. To see a boy this age, two boys if you counted the sparking spear-like shape around Sasuke's hand, so adept in it was absolutely amazing, and it was potentially a problem for her plan. Cinder's eyes narrowed on the two boys. They need to be dealt with soon. Ready, Naruto? Sasuke asked as he stood across from his childhood friend and rival. You know it, Sasuke! Naruto returned with a grin on his face as the spear in his hand began to sustain itself. The two launched at each other with their right hands pulled back. It's... They threw their hands forward, one chirped like 1,000 birds, and the other an almost mystical sound to it. Over! The attacks collided, and a dome of white light encased the two teens. The audience was forced to shield their eyes or look away, unless they had the foresight to wear sunglasses like a certain Faunus, who shook his head in bemusement. For the brief second that the rest of the audience was blinded, Kurama saw the two friends grin at one another and bump fists. Their fight was over, and their anger to one another was diminished, and their friendship restored. Man, those two are such drama queens, Kurama thought with a small chuckle. When the light died down, the crowd was able to see both teens standing on their last legs. Haku blinked and furrowed his brows together when he heard Kurama chuckle. He took in the state of his two other teammates and then let out his own small chuckle. Sasuke was haggard and breathing hard, and Naruto had the smallest bit of sweat pouring down the side of his face. Both had lost their grins, but had their fists together still. Both refused to back away, even though their legs would wobble uneasily beneath them. However, whoever moved first was going to fall, and they knew it. Both were just too stubborn to lose, even at this point. Asuma sighed after a moment. I guess that's that, he said. This match is a draw. A majority of the audience let out boos and groans of disappointment, whereas a small few applauded at the show or remained absently silent and thoughtful. Now, make it official. Form the Waikai no In, seal of reconciliation, Asuma said sternly to the two. Naruto and Sasuke carefully moved their fists back. Their index and middle fingers used in the first seal were brought up and then interlocked, with Naruto's on the top and Sasuke's on the bottom. The whiskered blonde gained a grin while the raven-haired teen smiled slightly. Then they promptly fell to their backs and passed out. Omaka, Valley of the End, 5 years ago, 30 miles outside of Kon Village. You're crazy, a boy no older than the age of 12 called over the roars of the nearby waterfall, while the blonde hair spiked uncontrollably from his head, kept out of his bright blue eyes by a thick blue bandana. An orange jacket with a white furred collar was zipped up to protect his neck from a gaudy pair of orange trousers over his legs, and blue combat-like sandals protected his feet. The boy's most prominent feature were the whisker-like scars he had on either cheek, currently curled down into a frown. There was another boy across the rapid waterfall between them. The boy the first had yelled at. He had raven black hair that spiked up in the back, and matched black eyes that stared at the orange-clad blonde who yelled at him. The dark-haired boy wore a high-collared blue shirt, white shorts, and armbands, and like the blonde, he had blue combat-ready sandals to protect his feet. I need to do this, the raven-haired boy shouted back. You don't understand. You never understood. How could you? You never had parents to begin with. That struck a chord in the blonde, and he visibly winced. The other boy continued. What has Khan given me? Friends, all of them are worthless children. They can't give me the strength to kill him. No, but they can help you stop him. I don't want to stop him, idiot. I want to kill him. Why? Because that's why I'm still alive. I must avenge my family. That's no excuse to kill someone. What will you do after you get your revenge? Exactly. You can't go through with this, the blonde proceeded. If you go to that damn snake for power, you'll only end up like him, a monster in human form. You remember what his lackeys did to Sakura? You want to end up like someone who could do that? Just shut up. What do you know? You're an orphan. You don't have a family. Yes, I do. That made the raven-haired boy start. I've got a godfather. I got a grandfather. I have brothers. I have sisters. I have aunts and uncles. They may not see it that way, but I do. My family is larger than anyone else's, and it only keeps growing. The blonde yelled firmly. He held his fist out to the raven-haired boy, and his blue eyes became hard. I promised one of my sisters that I'd bring you back, even if I had to break every bone in your body to do so. You couldn't even leave a scratch on me. The raven-haired boy heatedly protested. "Wanna bet?" The blonde skin began to glow. "Don't start something you can't finish." The pack slung over his shoulders was dropped to the ground, and his hands began to spark. The two boys glared at each other before they jumped from their respective banks. The blonde's hands balled into fists, and the onyx-eyed boy's knuckles turned white. Their right hands drew back before they were flung forward. Each fist found its mark in their respective cheek that had been targeted, and the two boys fell into the water. They burst to the surface and continued their fight, fists flying while they struggled against the current of the water that raced towards the falls. Finally, the raven-haired boy found a rock to kick off of and tackled the blonde over the edge. They fell like rocks, the blonde pounding his fist on the other boy's back before they crashed into the water below. With gasps, the two boys broke the water surface and swam to the nearby shore. They panted and cupped up water before they glared at each other. The fight began again, this time with the blonde slowly gaining the advantage. His semblance was better suited for this fight, since the other needed time to gather his. "Give up!" The blonde barked after a final punch that knocked the other boy to the ground. The whiskered blonde stood over his foe. "Just come home, Sasuke!" Sasuke turned and glared at the blonde. Before either knew what was happening, Sasuke's right hand was encased in sparks of lightning and was flying like a thrown spear at the center of Naruto's chest. A second before the attack pierced the blonde's skin, his left hand shot up and pushed Sasuke's hand right. There was a squelch, and a gasp before what had happened really clicked in the boys' minds. Sasuke pulled his hand back and stared at the cauterized hole in the blonde's chest. "Naruto, your lung." Sasuke stared at the side and then looked at his hand, covered in blood. Naruto fell to his knees and then to his side. His breath was labored. Sasuke looked down at him, then to his bloody hand, and then back down at the struggling blonde. His eyes forward and became cold. "Idiot!" Sasuke muttered loudly. "If you didn't move, it would have been quick." Naruto coughed and pressed his hand over his chest. His other hand reached out and grabbed Sasuke's leg. "Not dead yet," he protested. His eyes were becoming unfocused and lighter. "Gotta keep my promise." Sasuke stared indifferently, then at the blonde for a moment. He then looked at the hole in Naruto's back from where his hand had pierced through. His eyes went wide. Was it his eyes playing a trick on him, or was the hole closing? "Cuz Naruto Uzumaki never breaks a promise." Naruto coughed back less between each word, and the hole in his torso began to heal, along with the hole in his lung. His eyes turned gold, and his skin glowed. Then Sasuke's arm was in immense pain before he was whipped at the cliff. The last thing Sasuke can remember before he fell unconscious was the hard look in Naruto's golden eyes. It was just a look, but the unnatural forgiveness transferred along with it made Sasuke's eyes widen slightly. There were unsaid words along with the forgiveness, and those words, though not spoken, were the reason that Sasuke did not fight back when Naruto picked him up over his shoulders. "Time to go home, brother." End of chapter 18.